Well, in any time, but especially difficult fiscal times, if you're looking for folks to have confidence in the tough decisions that you have to make, then you have to try to make an attempt to let people know, your constituents know, that you play by the same rules that they play by. And I think that we're able to do that, probably making one of the strong ethics reforms in the nation right now. Pension reform was also something I heard loudly and clearly about. I'm not sure how much investigation you folks did on pension reform, but we all know that in all the news media throughout the state, whether it was in print or television or radio, pension reform was spoke about loudly and clearly. And I'm glad to say that I believe that we have addressed all those instances which previously existed, where folks were, we think, taking advantage of the system. Transportation reform. In addition to having about a $4 to $5 billion deficit in the budget, I was going to say I also inherited, but I suppose the Commonwealth also inherited a budget system that was on the brink of bankruptcy. And again, I think that what we're able to do is to streamline the system so that many of the various agencies that were now sort of independent outside of the box of the system, we're able to bring them into the system that hopefully is going to show us savings. We're able to also change the system, in particular for the pensions and the insurance of the folks who work at the MBTA, which I think over time is going to save us millions and millions of dollars for the taxpayers, to see that those folks now come under the GIC plan as opposed to their own plan. And finally, the budget. The budget was probably one of the most difficult, at least in my 20 years of being there. We did the budget on time for the first time in many a year. I think that we were able to address it in a number of ways. First of all, most importantly, that folks, I don't think, really follow that much, is that we made cuts. We made some very severe cuts, and made some difficult cuts, and people, I'm not sure how many folks really understand that we cut some $2 billion from our budget that we prepared for the next fiscal year, or the fiscal year we're in right now, I should say. In addition to that, we used some federal stimulus money to balance it. We used a little bit of rainy day fund money, and as I think I mentioned at the chamber meeting, when I was chair of Ways and Means, we had some $2.2 billion in stabilization funds, and we're now down to about $600 million. So what we're able to use from stabilization probably wasn't as great as we would have liked, but again, we have to be very frugal on our use of stabilization funds now, so that's why we had the limited use. And finally, we raised the additional $900 million through additional revenue, in particular the sales tax. And the other another $220 million also went right back to the cities and towns in the form of local aid. Now it turns out that, because of the declining economy, maybe at least $220 million off balance, and some folks are even saying as high as $600 million that has to be balanced.
To make up that gap, whether it's 200 million or 600 million, are you exclusively looking at cuts, or would you revisit the idea of trying to raise revenue somehow?
I would not raise revenue through taxes. I think taxes are off the radar screen. Right now, I would look. Well, actually, I shouldn't say when it's actually the governor's call in terms of where he makes the cuts, and I would presume that I would suggest that we make it will be through cuts. Now, having said that, I will tell you that one of my priorities have been, as we're going into the fall, is to try to bringing of jobs here into Massachusetts. I think that we can't tax our way out of this problem anymore, no matter how bad it may get. I think the biggest issue that we have is the providing of jobs, and more jobs. So I see that as one economic engine for us to use as we go into the fall well, I shouldn't say in the fall, probably more into the winter, into the spring, as we're trying to talk about bringing additional revenue here in Massachusetts.
Two questions on that, Mr. Speaker. One, the gaming. Are you looking at, before we get into the whole casino destination issue, whether or not a quick hit might be allowing slots at the racetracks?
I've always been a supporter of the slots at the racetracks. I think it's in a more immediate form of revenue. Some folks say 90 days. I think that's being a bit optimistic. Maybe it's 4 months, 5 months, maybe as long as 6 months, whatever it may be. And my first thought was, that's as far as we go. Let's see what happens and let's move on from there. My studies, my discussions with the chairman of economic development have since sort of changed my mind to the fact that I see with resort casinos the possibility of additional jobs with the construction. Once the casinos are built, the additional jobs as a result of folks who will be working at these facilities. So I'd have to say right now that I would be a supporter not only of slots at the tracks, but of resort casinos as well. I'd have to say there are a number of opponents to the film tax credit. And rightfully so. They raise the point, is the Commonwealth getting the most out of the investment that they're making? And you have to appreciate that. So I still have an ongoing study being done right now, as a matter of fact, by Chairman Kaufman, to take a look at the revenue aspects of the film tax credit. But I will say this, again, having looked at it a little more deeply, and I'm still waiting word from Chairman Kaufman, I do feel at this point anyways, with the statistics that are provided to me, with the revenue that we get as a result of the film tax credit, I believe right now is a good investment for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.